everyone, this is Lori Barnes with Kepler College back with another Let's Talk Astro-Mapping episode. This one is exciting because we are going to talk about the legendary Princess of Pop, the fearless Britney Spears. And I say we, but I really mean Joseph. So I'm very happy to introduce Joseph Milnes, who's going to do the presentation today. And we have Cindy McKeon, who is our expert astro mapper and faculty in the astro mapping program at Kepler College, as well as Joseph. So I'm really excited to host the two of our astro mapping expert faculty today. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Joseph, who's going to talk about Britney Spears.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joseph. I am the CEO of AstroloGeeks Inc., astrologeeks.com. And yes, I am teaching AM 207 currently at Kepler College, keplercollege.org. And we are currently teaching astronomy for astromapping. So there's going to be a little bit of tidbits from our course in this presentation. We are covering the legendary Ms. Britney Spears today. We're talking about one of my favorite pop icons, my personal favorite celebrity since I was a child. This is a subject that without astro mapping, Britney Spears' chart is really difficult to read for most astrologers, including myself. Her chart is just not significant. It doesn't scream rich and famous, super powerful pop princess. It doesn't yell anything other than ordinary at you until we look a bit deeper into the astro mapping and the timing of things. We're going to be talking about including different techniques with astromapping and a theory that has been asked before in our astromapping courses, which is, does annual profections work with astrocartography? And this is one of those subject case matters where I'm presenting where we may have evidence of a clue for such a connection and evidence that may be possibly that this is a probable means of activating your astrocartography lines and activating your planets through annual profections. So let's dive in. First, we'll be going into Britney Spears' life and telling her story and looking at it through a chronological lens. Then we're going to go ahead and dive into her chart and her mapping after the fact in more of an open discussion type of forum. So please follow me here as we have to kind of unravel the story of Britney in order to really dig deep into her astromapping. So, Britney Spears activating Saturn through astromapping, timing astroremediation with annual profections. First, we have to talk about Saturn in astrology. And we're going to talk about the astronomical meanings of Saturn, and you're going to be learning this in AM 207, how to delineate the meanings of the planets through astronomy, ripping away the lens of essential dignity and other astrological colorizations. Looking at the planets in their raw nature gives us a better understanding in their function, and understanding their cycles also helps us understanding their timings as well. Saturn is the perfect example of this timing technique since he is the Lord of Time himself. Saturn represents, we've heard this since ancient times. Saturn's about, boundaries, structure, order, obstacles. Well, thanks to improved technology, Saturn's poles are now been captured and have been observed, and they're known for having unusual atmospheric phenomena. Saturn has a North Pole hexagon and a South Pole warm vortex. At Saturn's North Pole hexagon, this is a geometric shape, a prominent hexagonal shaped storm at Saturn's North Pole was discovered by NASA's Voyager, and this hexagon is very large, and it's a persistent jet stream with winds moving at about 200 miles per hour. This hexagon is believed to have a long-lasting wave potentially tied to Saturn's rotation, okay? Meaning it's eternal. And NASA's Cassini spacecraft has provided detailed images suggesting the hexagon extends high into the atmosphere above Saturn's cloud tops. So there's a lot of energy going there in this vortex. But so Saturn's North Pole makes a geometric shape, okay? So think about it. This cloud is contained. It has a shape, right? Those are boundaries. That's also what Saturn is known for, which is giving structure and order to something, right? And the South Pole vortex is really an anomaly because it's a large-scale weathered pattern and it should be cold, right? And instead, it's actually really, really warm. And this temperature increases about near 70 degrees latitude from about like 185 to 182 negative at the pole. Okay. So when Saturn's equinoxes occur, temperature can increase dramatically. Scientists have also found that the jet stream at the edge of the hexagon may act as a barrier between the interior of the pole and the rest of the planet's atmosphere. So here's a good look at this hexagon shape. Just get a good look for what Saturn's boundaries are. It's also symbolized through the rings. We'll get more into that in AM 207, but follow me here because this is what Saturn does best, which is shapes and formation, and it requires boundaries and structure. Okay? Here's a good look at this North Pole and this hexagonal vortex that it makes that Cassini was able to record. And then this is a good look at the South Pole of the warm vortex. So its poles are really significant. They're really strong, right? And its South Pole actually looks like an eyeball. That might freak some people out. It does have some geometric shapes as well. So Saturn's rings also reveal unique properties about Saturn that can only be seen at the right time and position. Keep that in mind. Timing and position, okay? Because Saturn's tilt is like that of Earth's, okay? It's got 4 seasons, and it's at about a 24-degree tilt, right? And Saturn's equinox occurs roughly every 15 years, okay? Because his whole cycle is 29 and a half, right? So what's 30 divided by 2? About roughly 15 years, okay? We have Saturn equinox cycles. And this is when the plane of Saturn's rings align with the ecliptic, the sun's path, making the rings appear as a thin line from Earth, basically going invisible from our point of view. This phenomenon is called the ring plane crossing of Saturn, okay? And Saturn's B ring, one of its main rings, is home to structures called B ring peaks that are not solid mountains, but rather, rocks, particles, broken up stuff from previous moon collisions, reaching like 2.5 kilometers high. They look like mountains. Essentially, what was revealed during the Cassini mission was that during Saturn's season of equinox, the illumination geometry that accompanies the equinox lowers the sun's angle to the ring plane and causes these structures jutting out of the plane to cast long shadows across the rings. So these mountains, okay, appear to cast shadows across the rings the months before and after and during the equinox. And it is believed that over time, Saturn's rings will eventually dissipate and be no more. So here's a good look at this phenomena, this ring plane crossing. This is what it looks like from Earth's point of view, and this is what the Saturn equinox essentially does, right? There's only 4 planets in the solar system that have seasons, and that's including Earth, Saturn being the other one. And this is some old annotations from the first observations of Saturn through a telescope about his rings and this phenomena. So it's been well known since these rings were first observed. And here is a visual of these mountain shadows, quote unquote, at the Saturn equinox. So let's bear all of that in mind as we go into the story of Britney Spears, because this is a story all about being at the right time and the right place. Britney Spears was born on December 2nd, 1981 at 1:30 a.m. CST in McComb, Mississippi, okay? This is a Rodden rating of an A chart. It's by mother's memory, and I do think this is a pretty accurate chart. Britney Spears started her career early in life and started in the Mickey Mouse Club alongside Justin Timberlake and Christina Aguilera and other would-be names between 1993 and 1994. And in the year 1995, Saturn reached equinox. And then 13-year-old Britney posed for fashion photographer David Barron in a black and white photo shoot in Philadelphia. It is likely during these years that Britney Spears was working towards her goal of getting into the music industry. So let's think about that. Saturn equinox season, Britney Spears is preparing and she's doing a grayscaled, black and white, cut and dry, right? Grayscaled image for her career. Think about that. In Britney's life, early on, she's already started in her career at very young ages. So in June 1997, She prepares her first professional demo, and her mother arranged for her to travel between her home in Kentwood, Louisiana, and New York City, New York, the same day to meet with 4 record labels. 3 of the record labels rejected her, saying there wasn't going to be another Madonna, criticized her voice. There was a lot of reasons why they gave to it, including that they wanted pop stars and groups like the Backstreet Boys and Spice Girls. 2 weeks later, though, Jive Records signed Britney onto a contract. Britney Spears released Baby One More Time. Baby One More Time was written for bands like Backstreet Boys, TLC, and they were rejected by the other groups who heard the demo. But when she heard it, she knew it was going to be a hit. And over concerns, the record label thought that having the parents think about the title "Hit Me Baby One More Time" being a message of domestic violence, they decided to remove the term "hit me" and left it as ... "Baby One More Time" from the title. And so on November 26th, 1998, Baby One More Time debuted and was an instant massive success. It's the #1 selling female vocalist album as a solo artist ever. And 1999, her career is soaring and she just takes off. She was an instant success and she's not stopping. She's already recording Oops, I Did It Again and the music video for Oops, I Did It Again, which is featured here on Mars. So again, I'll reiterate. In 1999, Britney Spears began recording Oops, I Did It Again, and it was during her Aries 7th house profection. She recorded the music video depicting herself on the planet Mars with another man, and he's, coming to Mars, and she's supposedly there, and she's the alien on Mars. And if you watch the music video, you see there's like fire, and Phobos and Deimos are depicted in there, and it's the red planet, and it's just very interesting symbology. In 2001, Britney Spears lived in a Hollywood Hills estate. Now, FYI, this Hollywood Hills estate is the same estate that she bought from Brittany Murphy, who had passed away in that house, and it was said like this house was haunted. But already living on her Mercury line, during her Taurus perfection year, Spears was featured in the Joy of Pepsi Super Bowl commercial, which became Pepsi's utmost and most iconic, highest grossing advertisement to date. And in 2004, Britney married 2 men during her Virgo 12th house perfection. We'll get into the duality of Venus and Mercury in AM 207 when we delineate the planets. So bear in mind there's a duality here when we talk about Mercury and Venus. Jason Alexander and Kevin Federline were the 2 men that she had married during that year. During the following years, Kevin filed for divorce and Britney's legal and emotional troubles began. She battled for her children and her public image started to crumble. The media was always on her case. And, everything about her private life was just blasted in the media. Her driving with her children on her lap was just taken out of proportion and just paparazzi to death. And this all had an impact on her legal problems with Kevin. Okay. And at the same time, she was under a lot of pressure from her management to keep working and keep the image up. And, she just ended up, shaving her head famously in February 2007. And people mistook it and took it as like, oh, she's crazy, she's insane, she's unstable, as evidence of her instability and why she shouldn't have her kids. But it was really an act of rebellion against her management and the people who are profiting off of her. And she reveals this in her book when she says that, this was her FU to the world and to the people that were making her work, even when she wasn't happy. Subsequently, a year later, in February 2008, that's when her father petitioned for the court for conservatorship. She was like on a 5150 hold. And there's some more about it. You got to look into Britney's life about the nuances and her perspective on this hold. Okay. But we're just going to get through the facts here. So it was then made permanent in 2008 of October. Then a couple years later, Saturn's at equinox again. Here she says that, her father had promised to end the conservatorship, and yet he kept it in place. And during this year, it is said that Britney was just focused on her, quote, personal life and career. And you got to think about the axis of Saturn, okay, and what the Saturn Capricorn, Saturn Leo axis is, because you have Capricorn and Leo and Aquarius and Cancer, and these 2 signs. The Saturn is opposite of the sun and moon zodiacally, rulership speaking. So there's this kind of family father kind of balance going on at this time. We'll get into the Profections here in a little bit, but I just wanted to bring that up because it's during this time that she's focused on her private life and career, and she's working on releasing Femme Fatale, and she has a short-lived public relationship with her manager, and it's very clear that Saturn's at work here. Okay, and we'll have to go into the astrology when we get to that time. In 2013, Britney was relocated to Las Vegas and began her famous new residency, which was titled Britney, Piece of Me. And it was a very successful, quote unquote, I'll say successful as in monetarily and for her, like profit wise, was successful for the Britney Spears company. But this was probably one of her most excruciating abuses and times during the conservatorship where she was just worked to death and worked day and night. And this lasted for 4 years, all the way until 2017. Britney Spears had made several attempts to hire lawyers or get friends to pass legal statements written for the courts that she had tried to get her word across. And she had a difficulty proving it was herself or getting a lawyer or someone to represent her or anyone to pass the message. And she went as far as arranging for close friends to meet with her in a bathroom to give a handwritten statement. And the court dismissed it because her father fought it, obviously. And because it wasn't notarized, it was dismissed. Not once did these justices, Reva Goetz or Brenda Penny, ask or consider Britney's voice or requests during any proceeding, essentially having an ex parte hearing without Britney present during all of these conservatorship hearings. Britney was not allowed to be at her own court case. 2021, Britney was finally able to break free from her chains. The conservatorship ended, and Britney was given her voice back, with Instagram being her platform of choice. And she was finally able to tell her story of her entire life, including the abuses she went through with her former lovers, including those of like Justin Timberlake, obviously Kevin Federline. And this was done essentially by having to hire a personal scribe, someone who would listen to her and jot down every word, record everything she said, and take it word for word. And this image is from Britney Spears' last album, Glory, in 2016. And this was her artistic choice of depicting herself in chains.
If you're talking about the way that we could view Saturn's rings, that's something that's not so common that people know with the equinoxes, and how when the rings go invisible, it really slices like a knife. It's Saturn being at its most effective form. And if you're working with it, man, do you get things done? And if you're not aware of it, it could feel like the world is working against you. And that sounds exactly like what was going on in Britney Spears' life. What do you think, Joseph?
I think that Saturn has been a large player in her life.
How does one go about finding that information on the equinoxes of Saturn?
NASA has some pages and articles about the equinoxes of Saturn. So all you got to do is just Google it up, just type in Saturn equinox, and you'll get some information. Right now, I think in May 3rd of this year, we are currently in a Saturn equinox cycle, or have been, or reached one. So it happens about every 14.75 years, to be specific. Just look at those, and if you just use the time, you can go backwards in time and find other cycles that way.
Do other astrologers use this, or is this kind of a newer thing that you're bringing in, maybe from astronomy into astrology?
I have not heard any other astrologers bringing this in. So as far as I know, I'm the only one talking about this, bringing in the astronomy.
It's something that astrologers do know, but it's not much talked about because they're looking more at the obvious things. But if you're an astrologer that does astronomy, this is going to be something you cannot ignore, because there's different ways of looking at Saturn. 3 of the phases, essentially. It's grower. If you're like below Saturn, looking at its rings, and its rings hover above you, so to speak, it means there is a tendency to aspire and to grow and to learn. And then there is the builder. If you're like above the rings and you're looking down at the rings, it's like it's supporting you. You could kind of stand on them, so to speak. So there's a tendency to apply or work with discipline, and you can manifest what you are working towards that way. And then there's that period that started March 23rd of 2025 this year, where it's like the edger. That's the one that slices right through you. This is when Saturn says, okay, it's time. It usually you feel it in your life. You feel it as a quickening. You'll notice in your life that like if you are piled up with work, you're just going to be like, I need to be as effective and most prioritized as possible. It's pretty intense. If you don't follow up with it as it's going through its next seasons over the next few years, you're almost going to find that that builder period might even, or that grower period might, where you're below the rings might feel like it's a weight on you. So it's a really good time to just move forward with that. I can't say it's exactly ancient, but it came about with the advent of the telescopes and when man was able to see the rings a lot more clearly out in space.
I understand we're in this equinox period with Saturn. It would seem like everyone is experiencing Saturn and equinox because it's the environment. Then we have when you're born, there would be people born under an equinox. There could be people born where they're under it or when they're looking down on it. So it makes me think about how we look at, other planets in a natal chart and we distinguish them in these ways. So you have your natal condition and then you have the transiting condition to take into consideration. What Brittany was, did you say she was born under an equinox, or no, you were saying that she was going through an equinox when her career first started taking off? Do you happen to know what she was born under?
Brittany was an equinox at 13 years old. It would have been an equinox a year before she was born.
Got it. It's
So
really
it would be on the, and we will have to go to an astronomy software to possibly, and it's really difficult because not a lot of astronomy softwares can simulate this. So, well, it's a matter of observation and knowing that part of the cycle and seeing it with a telescope. And I think that we should definitely work towards trying to track that because it's not something that is simulated or is recorded even in astronomy calculations.
So there's going to probably be some viewers like myself who want to know, well, where was Saturn in that cycle when I was born? That's just something that could be ripe for research. All of you astromappers out there who are listening, the way that the astrology world is going, it's booming. There's a lot of people coming in and growing our community. And we're seeing that there are still many opportunities of research. There's nothing out there, right? So this is just one of those areas that somebody might be listening to this and might want to really take it upon themselves to learn more. And if that's you, I really encourage you to take the astronomy course.
That's not the only planet with rings. Uranus and Neptune has rings too. And they also have their equinoxes and they manifest a little bit differently because the planetary energies are different. So for instance, with Neptune, it might be if you're under the rings, it would be about to see what's happening. If you're under the rings, it's like, are you dreaming about something that you could achieve? You might be surfing on the rings if it's like, pretty much aligned, or it could be something like you're gasping.
Uranus's rings are always facing you. So there's one side that's never facing you and the other side that is. So Uranus is always going to rebound. Boing, 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 boing back energy. That make sense?
But there's a point where it could look like an eye as it's turning, Joseph. And if the rings overlap, then you're grounded. If it forms a circle or a near circle, that's like a portal with Uranus. And if you're viewing it edge on, it's like a slice. And that's even like more of a super Uranus with all the unexpectedness and just the bolt from the blue, so to speak, that has its like knock-on effects. So yes, it's definitely area ripe for research, Lori, but to apply it to astromapping makes it even more powerful because when you go to that planetary line, you're effectively isolating that energy or making it a lot more powerful to manifest that way.
Let's go into her chart and let's see just how significant Saturn is. She was born December 2nd, 1981, 1:30 a.m. And this is in McComb. This is an interesting chart. Again, it doesn't scream like rich and famous. It doesn't scream superstar. Every planet is below the horizon except for one. There's Mars. And we know that she's a Libra rising, so she is very Venusian. She's beautiful, she's soft, she's fair, she is likable, she's popular. And with the Cancer midheaven, this means that her private life is publicly exposed and she is vulnerable to criticism or is likely to develop a hard shell from always being criticized. And her chart ruler, Venus, sits in the fourth house of home and family and is sitting in the sign of Capricorn, which is ruled by Saturn. Saturn then is having dominion over Venus. But if you look at Saturn, Saturn's in Libra, and it's the sign of the ascendant ruler. And Saturn is in, therefore, mutual reception with Venus. And look, Saturn is in a wide square along with Pluto with Venus. So here is already a tale of boundaries and chains and oppression and physically very fit and someone who is essentially, and now you can't always think about the square as always being super difficult, as it will charge the career and her fame in this way. If you look at the way that Saturn prominence in her chart, her career obviously took off very well. This didn't stop her from making millions of dollars, right? Or millions and millions of dollars. This dynamic, though, does have its polarity in which she makes all this money and then is locked away from it. Bear in mind, she also has a Venus trine Mars, and so this adds to her beauty, her attractiveness, her high energy, her sex appeal. And when we look at the planets, she has a first quarter moon. So moon is more productive of humidity despite being in a sign like Aquarius. Again, we're not looking at dignity. We're looking at the phase of the moon in which it's more productive of humidity and it's growing in light. So it's waxing. It's always able to culminate and it's very fertile, right? Her moon is very fertile for production. And she has a fifth house moon. So this is great for creativity, arts, music, acting, all that other stuff that she loves. Let's take a look at the stars above her head, her location. This is her local space. This is her planetarium, right? And we can see here towards the east, the only planet above the horizon is Mars. It's just above the horizon. It's there towards the east. And it's in the constellation of Leo, just at the tail. And altitude, we discuss in AM 207, matters. The planet with the highest altitude, especially above the horizon, are going to exert more force. So if you think about all the planets being below the horizon, leaving it to only Mars exerting itself, and even though Mars is said to be less malefic in a night chart, it's still up to Mars being how much it has an influence over her, right? Essentially saying Mars has a stronger influence. Men have a strong influence in her chart. The men in her life coming from the east, right, are going to play a role. And what is Mars, right? Mars is abusive, right? Mars is chaotic. Think about the song, Baby One More Time. It's Hit Me, Baby One More Time. It started off with the theme of domestic violence, okay? And it seems to be in her life that men all over have taken advantage of her. They're the ones that are taking advantage of Miss Spears. It's her father. It's these men who come along for quick pump and dump careers. That's what I call them. That's where the nature of Mars is just basically left to be by itself. If there was any other planet above the horizon, maybe at a higher altitude, it would change the nature of things. But essentially, Britney Spears does need to be careful and cautious of men because men will try to exert their dominance over her. And then when we look at the orrery, so what is an orrery? Orrery is a true three-dimensional view of space, of our heliocentric solar system. And in my orrery on astrologeeks.com, we can go ahead and just simply do this little quick trick here, which is to pull Earth to the bottom, okay, and have the sun in the middle. And here we can see the positions of the planets. Okay, and let's look at our inside planets, right? Our inner planets. And Venus is the closest planet to Earth. So this is where she really has a strong Venus, despite it being in Capricorn, right? You would think that it being in a neutral sign. This is why I'm saying, take the colorization of dignity out. It doesn't make sense. Venus is strong. And it gives a lot of power to Saturn, right? And Mercury happens to be on the other side of the sun in her chart. So even though she's got a kind of a wide conjunction with the sun and Mercury here, it's still behind the sun. So Mercury's message gets delayed. Okay. It's blotted out. It's blinded by the light of the sun. It's more difficult for Britney's own voice to be heard. People misunderstand her own words, her intentions during interviews, what she writes on social media, everything all the time. Everything Britney Spears says gets taken out of context. That's why she had to have someone one-on-one with her to basically record what she had to say to get her message out, because her Mercury is so blotted out by the sun that she can't get her voice through, even though she has an audience of millions of people. I think that we can move on from the astrology of her chart and we can look at her compass and we can look at the geospatial aspects of where she was born.
Can I ask a quick question, Joseph?
Totally.
What if she goes to the southern hemisphere?
We can look at that.
Because then all of those planets that were invisible where she was born, they would be visible for her if she goes to the southern hemisphere.
Would Britney Spears like going to Mexico? I guess that's a good question. She has traveled there. It really comes down to the geospatial aspects, because if the geospatial aspects don't agree, then the area isn't right.
Pluto and that Saturn, she does have an out of bounds Venus. So that is somebody who's going to want to be herself. She's going to express her style very uniquely. And would you say that's more of a struggle for her now that it's interesting with the whole imagery with the chains? And I remember she had imagery with like a snake around her. And how much do you think this would be affecting her life then?
I think that with Venus being out of bounds or like having a high, let me see, look at her declination. Yeah, really strong declination. So here's what she said. She says that in her life, people have always found her being sexy and hot, either a threat or they would see it as like she couldn't possibly be talented. She couldn't possibly be smart. She couldn't possibly handle herself because she was so beautiful.
And with the horizon chart, I just wanted to note in ancient astrology, the planets that were closest to the horizon were also super important as well. And interestingly, that Mars that is close to her ascending horizon, it could be one of two things in somebody's life. It could be protection in one way or another, in that it's kind of like having that Martian force towards something that is about to come over the horizon, so to speak. So you have your marshal over there to make sure that it could kind of block it before it comes, or it could manifest as over control. So that's interesting how she had that Mars right on the ascending horizon over there.
Yep. And being the only planet having the greatest altitude, having a positive altitude, it exerts more dominance that way. So think about it. We have both of the malefics at work in her chart. And what a tale for the goddess of love and beauty, right? To deal with her counterpart Mars in such a way. I'm looking at Britney's compass, and here we can see that geospatial aspects of where she was born suggest that, you know, she had a kind of a nice time growing up. It was a good life. She loved her mom. Her dad was, she says, was always abusive and cold, but she loved her mom and she had a really close relationship with her mom. She even like would drink beers with her mom at a young age, sitting in the car, or just because her mom, that's what her mom did. Her mom had an alcohol problem. And we could see some of that here with the moon and Venus and Neptune in a trine being the only geospatial aspects that she had. Otherwise, they're just left to be conjunctions and oppositions. Here in her astrocartography chart, this is her ACG chart, okay? So she was born here. You can see she's not really in a lot of contact with her lines until she has to, in her story, she's already moved to Kentucky, okay? So that's where she was born. And then she moved to Louisiana. All right, so she relocates to here, not too far from her hometown, okay? Just after the Saturn equinox, she's prim, taking her black and white photos. And then she begins and has to travel during in 1997, right? It was 1997. She travels to New York, New York. And here she submits her record, her demo, to 4 record labels. And she's essentially within contact of her Saturn on the ascendant line. This is significant because it's during this time, I'm going to pull up her annual perfections table. If you know anything about annual perfections, you know that her being a Libra rising, the first house perfection starts from her ascendant at age 0, with Venus being Time Lord, and we count from there. Okay. Between 1996 and 97, she's preparing herself, priming herself, getting these demos done, getting herself situated. And she's in her 4th to 5th house perfection, right? Still in her 4th in June. At this point, she's still in her 4th, and she's in between 2 Saturn cycles. So it's a nice long cycle for her to get prepared for. And it's in this summer of 1997 that Saturn is still Time Lord, and it's the ruler. It's going to be the 5th house, but it's still the 4th house. It rules both signs. And she comes into contact with her Saturn on the ascendant line. So it's Time Lord at the time that she goes to make contact with this astrocartography line and triggers fate from this point. She was rejected by 3 of the 4 labels. 2 weeks later, she is found by Jive and says yes and signs, and history is made from there. So in 2008, remember, she gets put on the conservatorship. And this is during her Saturn cycle. And it's during these years that the conservatorship has begun and was made permanent, ironclad. We move on to 2010, which, by the way, happens to be the next Saturn equinox. And she is at work releasing Femme Fatale, and she's supposedly working on this life, career, work-home balance thing that she's got going on. And you can see the polarity from Saturn having that theme. But it's this year that she has basically, I'm doing it for the kids. And then we go back all the way to the next Saturn cycle in 2020 and in 2021. She petitions for it, and it has it dissolved, and hires a super lawyer that is able to take on the case, and this has made headlines, and finally the conservatorship is ended. So in every cycle of Saturn since coming into contact with her Saturn ACG line during a Saturn perfection cycle has been fated and has manifested in some big way regarding her life. And of course, what is Saturn's nature? It is boundaries, obstruction, it's limitations, it's obstruction, it's hard work, it's discipline, it's all those things that come into play. It doesn't end there. You know, we look at Las Vegas and her Las Vegas residency, and during that time in the conservatorship, she is right on her sun on the IC line, okay? And the sun represents the father. You would say, oh, well, she has a sun in Sag. It's going to be great for her. It's a great place. And it seemingly was good for her career. It was seemingly good for her, but it wasn't. It was good for the Britney Spears company. It was good for Mr. Spears. It was good for her dad. It was good for the people profiting off of her. And she says that her tendency during this, because this is her other home, her residency. What is the IC except for a home? This is her public career home, essentially, that has been done for her. And it's good for her career. She makes a lot of money, but she is enslaved, working to death, and her dad is cracking the whip over here on her. Then, of course, if we look at where she lives in California, and she's lived all over the place between LA and San Francisco, living around this Mercury line. And this is Mercury on the IC. And if you think about how Britney spent most of her life living in California, what has her life been like, right, with Mercury on the IC? Well, you have the paparazzi and the media publicizing her every little facet of private life, every second, every blinking moment. And it doesn't end after her rise and peak of fame. Everything she posts on social media and on social network from her home, that's her private life on social network. And even then, that's still, everyone misunderstands what she says. You know, when we go and look at her compass and we see these relocations in place, we can see another layer here with the geospatial aspects, okay? And here's her birth town. Here is New York. So let's go to New York and see how this comes into play. So here's New York, near her ACG line, and there it is. Venus and Moon have separated geospatially, but now Venus is trine Saturn. Okay. And other aspects that Venus makes is also trine Mars widely, but it's really, really, really tight to Saturn with a less than a 1 degree orb. So this is where remediation comes in. She had a Venus square Saturn in her natal chart, but here, geospatially, Venus is trine Saturn. It was good for her career. And that's what triggered everything. And we wouldn't be able to see this without the astro-mapping tools, without the compass, without the maps, without essentially seeing these new tools that have been developed. Because Brittany's chart is amazing when you start going into the astro-mapping. That's where the beauty of it lies. And I think that's pretty much the gist of the timing techniques that I can show off here. I can stop sharing my screen for a moment if you guys want to chat for a bit and give it some air.
We can talk a little bit about the geospatial aspects, and to explain to people what it is that it is essentially about vantage point. Say you're standing next to a car, your vantage point of the car, you're going to see how the car looks from the side. But if you move to the front of the car, you see a different vantage point of the car, and it looks a little bit different. And that's the same with relocating from city to city, or especially if you're going across, wider spans of travel, where you're going to see how the planets in the sky might connect a little bit differently. And one other thing I wanted to mention in regards to perspective with that, in Brittany's radial chart, she has Jupiter and Uranus in different houses. So her Jupiter is in, well, if I'm using Coke houses, she has Jupiter in her first house and Uranus in her second house. But they're actually in the same longitude. And even though in the natal chart they're averse each other, which means they don't see each other, well, the fact that they're in the same longitude indicates something that is similar to a conjunction. So Jupiter conjunct Uranus, think of how much of a breakthrough that could be. And she is a sun sign Sagittarius, and that Jupiter would have a major role in her life, especially if it's in the first house. And now it's getting this boost from Uranus with that major breakthrough. So the astro mapping is more of a 3D version of a person's chart. And you really, really get to see a lot more things at play that explain a lot more, just like Joseph had said about where it looks like it could be some ordinary person's chart. It's not like she had some planetary placements where you're going to be like, whoa, this person is really bound for greatness. So astro-mapping actually gives you the answers to that.
So we know that Britney Spears' ex-husband, Kevin Federline, lives in Hawaii. He lives in Maui. The past few years, her sons were staying with him in his Maui home until recently, after her conservatorship ended. And here in Hawaii, we can see this brings her near her Jupiter IC line. And you would think, well, that's got to be pleasant. It's really not for her. It's also close to her Pluto IC line. And when we relocate her chart there, the way her relocated chart there looks, you would probably suspect that she would not enjoy it very much there. When you do relocate it, you'll see got a lot of tension there. And if you go ahead and look at her relocated charts on any of these locations, you'll see how the story kind of like tells a different thing for her on each one. And to remediate it, it comes down to finding the geospatial aspects. And, she lives here in California, and I think it's overall, she's very comfortable there. So if we look at her compass and we just relocate it to, let's go to just Los Angeles, because it's just close to where she generally lives, generally speaking. There's only one, discordant aspect, but she has a lot more activity going on. It's either she has very little aspects in everywhere else, but here in California, it's just busy enough for her to keep her, out of trouble, keeps her entertained, it keeps her active, and she's got enough to do there. And she has friends there. She likes to stay close with the people that she has a close connection with, and she doesn't have a lot of people that she trusts anymore. So I'm sure that she's not likely to relocate from here. But if I was Brittany's astrologer, I would probably advise to her that she be careful of the men in her life and not allow men to dominate her or take control of her resources or to even marry her, because her history of men has just been that they are apt to take advantage of her, and she's just susceptible to being taken advantage of, and should just always be cautious of that. If she wants her freedom and independence, she should maintain that in her relationships as well. If I was going to advise as far as Britney's career is concerned, Mars is in the 12th house in her natal chart. So she does work well working behind the scenes, being a ghost writer, doing that kind of behind the scenes work. And if she is to continue her career, she's probably better off not doing any more music and being in the spotlight anymore and putting herself through those same dynamics, because it's not going to change. The dynamics will be consistent. She's probably better off just doing the quiet work and having some peace for herself.
It's interesting too if we cast her local space lines or if we look at her natal compass and we see the directions of her moon line. It goes over nearby Hawaii. And if we could think of like mother and children, that's where her children are essentially. And there's that Pluto and Jupiter playing a role there of legal control over her children. I agree with you, Joseph. If she moved over there, just remembering her relocated natal, she wouldn't really enjoy Hawaii as much.
Because relocated natal does tell us a little bit of differences of the house positions, right? If we go to New York, this puts Saturn pretty close to the horizon. You would think, oh, Saturn can't be great for career. This is terrible for career. But actually, Saturn's best at being at his equinoxial, angular, shapy, cutting edge position like this. I think this is where Saturn's at its strongest, is at positions like this when he's angular. As we can see, that's the only real difference in our chart, other than the moon being trine the ascendant. So she was liked and was moved, did move somebody at some point. When we relocate it to, let's go to Los Angeles, just as she changes her locations, the stories change. Here, it may be more dynamic and it may be more of a home for her, sun and fourth house there. But it becomes where Saturn and Pluto are in the second house. And so it changes the dynamic of Venus. And so eventually she would have been succumbed to having her finances oppressed, being in this location long enough. And if we look at Hawaii here, you can see that you got Jupiter on the descendant here, or on the IC, and it just doesn't scream anything other than she hates it. She hates him. With Moon on the seventh house, square all that energy, and she doesn't mind her kids going there. She just personally doesn't want to be there. It's not quite her culture. And we can see that with the geospatial aspects too. We can see that in the compass where she had some discordant aspects there. So I'm going to stop screen sharing. And I think now's a good time for any last minute questions and open discussion.
Any other place for her to move to within the United States? Would you recommend somewhere else?
The only other place I would recommend is her home region. That's where she had most of the quietness in her life, even though she can't reasonably assimilate into the population like a normal person. She can relocate there for some peace, and she does have a home out there. So I'm sure she goes out there for peace and for isolation. As far as traveling anywhere else, I think that if Britney Spears would have wanted to move, she would have moved from California by now. And that's just not the case. I think that she has found a home there. The sun in the fourth house there just kind of hones it in there. She's just towards the west.
That makes sense.
She likes warm places. So if she's going to go anywhere below the equator or on the south region, she'd be somewhere warm and beachy. I heard she likes Mexico and she loves the beach. So as long as she can have a beach near her, that will make her happy.
Can probably afford to have a beach right outside her door.
So there you guys have it. I think that's my hypothesis and presentation that, yes, I do think that annual perfected Time Lords, in combination with astrocartography and actively working with your astrocartography lines, can really activate the raw nature of that planet in a most faded, unimaginable way. But be prepared, you're going to get the raw nature of that planet. And you're going to get both sides of that planet, the good and the bad.
And they make a great point by saying that be prepared. You're going to get the raw energy of that planet. And that's really, it's like basking under a certain color of light when you're going under a planetary line. You always remain yourself. Your natal chart is you, but it's where you go to the highlight, essentially. But you make an excellent case with using Profections and Astro-Mapping, whereas most of the timing techniques people were familiar with astrocartography in particular, is the transits and the progressions. So it is really nice to be able to make an extremely good case in point of areas for more research. If you decide to enroll into Kepler College AM 207, which is beginner's astronomy for Astro-Mapping, you will start to become and get some grounding for that and how astronomy gives you more insight to how the Astro-Mapping works. You might want to see too, if you stick with Kepler College, how we develop a bit more of the astronomical systems, where we talk about the equinoxes of different planets and how that plays a role too. So great job, Joseph, with showing that. And it's just really compelling. This is not the typical, hey, she lives next to her sun line or next to her Mercury line. This is really scratching the surface and going deeper into areas that no one else would normally be able to see in a regular natal or transit chart.
And thank you very much for giving me the task to be able to research this, because I feel that I'm better at research when I'm being asked to do something that is, yeah, I'm a fan, but I wasn't prepared to do the Astro-Mapping for Britney. So thank you for the opportunity for the research, and thank you for letting me present this.
Yeah, well, thank you for being here. It's fascinating, and I love how we see different techniques being used together. This is the practical application of our art, and we're constantly learning more, right? Astrologers are learners for life. And once we have enough education, we can start blending these techniques together. So this is really wonderful. I'm excited that you were here and demonstrating amazing ways that you can use Astro-Mapping with other techniques. If you are watching this and you're wondering where you learn more about Profections, we have a course called Solar Returns, and that's taught by Shu Yap, and she definitely covers Profections there. We just released a Hellenistic certificate, so I'm sure that Profections will be touched on there, and we also have a medieval certificate in development. So you will be able to learn these techniques at Kepler College from different faculty members and different certificate programs. I would like for both of you to share the courses that you teach at Kepler and the terms that they run. There's different dates every year, but just so you could get an idea of where you can learn from Joseph and Cindy, we'll start with Joseph and then we'll hear from Cindy. So Joseph, tell us again what you teach and what term it usually runs.
I am teaching astronomy for Astro-Mapping beginners at AM 207. This is our spring and fall course. So you can catch me twice a year teaching this. We'll be covering things like the altitude of the planets, geospatial planetary ascensions, and we'll be delineating the meanings of the planets through astronomy and applying it to astro-mapping and astrocartography. So that way you can start being a better astrocartographer.
Wonderful. Thank you. And then Cindy is also one of the developers of our Astro-Mapping certificate. So tell us, Cindy, all the different courses that you teach and the term that they usually run.
First, I'd love to say that I have a lot of fun teaching these courses, and I really enjoy delving into it and breaking it down to make it a lot more simplified for people to understand, because I truly believe in this astro-mapping technique and approach. And I don't think it should be a branch, but a fundamental when we're learning astrology. And I teach AM 100, that is Astro-Mapping for beginners, and that's more the interpretive approach to astro-mapping. We talk a lot more about astrocartography and a little bit about the local space and touch on the geodetic techniques. And I co-teach AM 207, Beginners Astronomy for Astro-Mapping with Joseph. And I do a lot of mixed methods media with that. I get people to draw the celestial equator and the ecliptic, and doing that kinetic type of application, it doesn't become so confusing. It demystifies it. And we do talk about the declination, and we learn how to plot even a local space map together. And I also teach the AM 300 practicum. That's the advanced level that we have to actually bring all the techniques together and really know how to make it a cohesive technique. And you are able to bring in other techniques like what Lori mentioned. For instance, I took Shu Yap's solar return course. Amazing teacher, amazing course. And you could apply those to your Astro-Mapping. Lori and I are going to be co-teaching a course together for Astro-Mapping. Lori, would you like to talk a little bit about that one?
We have noticed at Kepler College how popular the Astro-Mapping classes are and the certificate, and that a lot of the students at Kepler College are going on to actually bring this into their business. I teach marketing for astrologers at Kepler College, and so Cindy and I thought it would be nice to do a master class on launching your Astro-Mapping business. So we will talk about marketing and business strategies, but also the unique ways to do this when you are offering Astro-Mapping services, because various types of astrology, there's different approaches that you're going to take in your business. So we're going to really focus in on Astro-Mapping for business. You know, how do you launch, develop, grow your Astro-Mapping business? So we hope you join us. That is going to run in the spring, and it should run every spring moving forward.
And right now, we just got approval. It's exciting news that we could develop a track of astronomy for Astro-Mapping as a certificate. And that would be to start with 30 credits. And the AM 207 beginners astronomy for Astro-Mapping is the beginner's course of it. We go into 2 courses of astronomy for astrocartography and 2 courses of astronomy for local space, and then we bring it together in its own practicum. This is the real skeleton behind the Astro-Mapping. Besides just the fluffy interpretations, you really get to understand it, and it becomes inherent once you know the astronomy of it.
Astronomy is very important, I think, for Astro-Mapping. Saying that experientially, I've taken all of Cindy's classes, and I'm in the astronomy class, and it's amazing to draw the circles and really get an understanding of our great circles and how they function in astrology and Astro-Mapping.
As Joseph mentioned, we're going to be offering that twice a year, so spring and fall. And the practicum is offered once a year. By the time we launch the astronomy for Astro-Mapping certificate, it would be in 2026. That's the aim, to start in winter of 2026. However, before you enroll, we highly recommend, and actually we're going to make it a prerequisite, that you take a basic astronomy for astrologers class, because the universe is so vast. We can't just cover it in 30 weeks or in even 10 weeks as, you know, the basic astronomy for astrologers, but it will give you very good footing. And we do have that class available in Kepler College too. We have 2 different astronomy classes available. One by Bruce Schofield, which is a workshop, and that's a 10-week workshop that you can work at it within 4 months. And we have one that's offered by Jeff Groland and Brandon Hansen, who offer their own unique approach and style with how they teach. I've taken both and I highly recommend them.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Let's talk Astro-Mapping. Thank you to Joseph. Thank you to Cindy. I'm Lori. We will see you in another YouTube video in the future.